A girl paid just $1 for what everyone called a useless German shepherd. The crowd laughed. The auctioneer mocked her. But something in that dog's eyes told her there was more. That same night, someone tried to burn her home to the ground, and the so-called useless dog wouldn't stop growling at the darkness. As fires spread across the countryside, whispers started about missing evidence, powerful men, and a dog that seemed to know too much. He wouldn't obey English commands, but the moment she spoke one strange word, everything changed. The dog wasn't broken. He was trained for something dangerous. Now, a woman with nothing left must uncover the truth that others died to hide, while a silent partner with a soldier's instincts guards her every move. Together they'll face the fire no one else dares to fight. But what secret was buried with this useless dog? And how far will the men who created it go to keep it dead? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late summer sun beat down mercilessly on the county fairgrounds, where a cluster of people gathered for the estate auction. Tamsin Holt shifted her weight from one dusty boot to the other, her weathered hat pulled low to shield her eyes. She hadn't planned on coming today, but something had drawn her here. Maybe the same stubborn hope that kept her working her brother's struggling farm despite mounting debts. At the edge of the crowd, chained to a post and lying in the dirt, was a German shepherd. The dog's coat was dull and unkempt, but his amber eyes were alert, watching everything. Something about those eyes caught Tamsin's attention and wouldn't let go. "Next up, this here German shepherd," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the grounds. "Found wandering after old Greta Weiss passed. Been nothing but trouble since. Won't follow commands, won't work. Useless animal, but might make an okay yard dog if anyone wants it." The crowd muttered, a few people laughing. Tamsin studied the dog more closely. Despite his rough appearance, she could see the intelligence in his face, the careful way he held himself. "Do I hear $20? The auctioneer called. Silence fell over the crowd. $10? More silence. The auctioneer's face twisted with annoyance. "Come on, folks, $5 to take this mutt off our hands?" Tamsin raised her hand. $1, she called out clearly. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's lip curled. "Miss Holt, you sure know how to drive a hard bargain. $1 bid. Anyone want to go higher?" He waited a beat, then shrugged. "Sold to Tamsin Holt for $1. Your brother would be proud of such a smart investment." The sarcasm in his voice made Tamsin's cheeks burn, but she held her head high as she walked over to the dog. Up close, she could see old scars beneath, his fur, telling stories she didn't yet understand. She knelt down slowly, letting him catch her scent. "Hey there, boy," she said softly. "Want to come home with me?" The dog's ears pricked forward, and he studied her face intently. After a moment, he stood up, his movements precise despite his apparent neglect. As Tamsin reached for his chain, a shadow fell across them both. She looked up to see County Commissioner Clint Marrow, standing there in his expensive suit, looking completely out of place in the dusty fairground. "Miss Holt," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Taking in strays now? You can barely keep that farm of yours running as it is." Before Tamsin could respond, a low growl rumbled from the German shepherd's chest. It wasn't loud, but something in that sound made the hair on the back of Tamsin's neck stand up. The dog's eyes were fixed on Marrow, and there was nothing unfocused or uncertain about his stance now. Marrow took a step back, his practiced smile slipping for just a moment. "Better keep that animal under control," he said, his voice harder now. "Be a shame if it caused any trouble." Tamsin unclipped the chain from the post and wrapped it around her hand. "He'll be fine, Commissioner. I know how to handle animals." She kept her voice neutral, but something in Marrow's reaction to the dog had caught her attention. The crowd had thinned out, people drifting away to examine other auction items. Tamsin led the dog toward her old pickup truck, feeling Marrow's eyes on her back the whole way. The German Shepherd walked beside her perfectly, no pulling or hesitation, making her wonder about that useless label. The drive home was quiet, the dog sitting calmly in her passenger seat, watching the landscape roll by. As the sun began to set, painting the Colorado hills in shades of gold and purple, Tamsin turned onto the dirt road leading to her farm. "Well, boy," she said, pulling up in front of the weathered farmhouse. "Welcome home, such as it is." The dog jumped down from the truck and immediately began a methodical inspection of the yard, his nose working carefully along the ground. Tamsin watched him, noticing how he moved with purpose, not the random wandering of a regular farm dog. She spent the evening getting him settled, setting up water and food bowls, making sure he was comfortable. The dog accepted everything quietly, those intelligent eyes always watching, always alert. As night fell, Tamsin stacked some wood by the back door. The nights were getting cooler, and she liked to be prepared. It was well past midnight when the dog's bark jolted her awake. Not just a bark, an urgent, aggressive sound she hadn't heard from him all day. Tamsin scrambled out of bed and rushed to the window. In the pale moonlight, she could make out a figure near her woodpile. As she watched, frozen, a small flame flickered to life. The figure was trying to light her woodpile on fire, and if they succeeded, it would spread to the house in minutes. The German Shepherd's barking had turned to snarling now. He shot past her through the back door she hadn't even realized she'd opened, a blur of focused fury in the darkness. The figure by the woodpile stumbled backward, dropping something that sparked against the ground. Then they were running, disappearing into the shadows beyond her property line. Tamsin's hands shook as she found her flashlight and phone. The dog returned to her side, pressing against her leg as if to steady her. When she shined the light on the woodpile, she found a lighter and some kind of accelerant, the sharp chemical smell making her nose burn. This hadn't been random. Someone had targeted her farm specifically, and as she stared at the evidence of their intent, a cold feeling settled in her stomach. The German Shepherd looked up at her, his expression almost knowing, and she remembered his reaction to Commissioner Marrow earlier that day. "Good boy," she whispered, her hand finding his head in the darkness. He leaned against her, solid and real, and she realized that maybe she wasn't the only one who had done the rescuing today. Looking out into the darkness of her property, Tamsin felt the weight of questions she couldn't yet answer. Why would someone target her farm? What had she stumbled into? And why had this supposedly useless dog been so precisely where she needed him to be? The morning after the attempted woodpile fire, Tamsin tried to lose herself in her usual routine. The familiar rhythm of farm work had always been her comfort, especially since losing her brother. But today, something kept pulling at her attention, or rather someone. Kaiser, her $1 German Shepherd, wasn't behaving like any farm dog she'd ever known. As she lugged feed sacks into the barn, she noticed him watching her with an intensity that made her pause. When she accidentally knocked over a stack of bags, spilling feed across the floor, Kaiser didn't just watch. He acted. The dog methodically began nosing the fallen sacks into a neat line, arranging them by size. Tamsin stood frozen, clutching an empty feed bag, as Kaiser worked with military precision. This wasn't the random pawing of a curious animal. These were practiced movements, deliberate and trained. "What kind of dog are you?" she whispered. Kaiser's ears twitched at her voice, but he continued his task until every sack was perfectly aligned. Then he sat back, looking at her with those knowing amber eyes, as if waiting for the next command. Throughout the morning, Tamsin noticed more oddities. Kaiser didn't wander aimlessly like most dogs would. Instead, he patrolled the property in precise patterns, stopping at regular intervals to scan the surroundings. He paid special attention to the kerosene shed, where she kept fuel for the old tractor. Every time they passed it, Kaiser would stop, nose working overtime, before giving her what could only be described as a meaningful look. Around noon, Tamsin spotted smoke rising over the hills. Her heart jumped into her throat as she remembered the attempt on her own property the night before. She jumped into her truck, Kaiser leaping into the passenger seat without being called, and drove toward the Anderson place next door. The sight that greeted them made her stomach turn. The Andersons' barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching hungrily toward the sky. Fire trucks were already on scene, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. The acrid smell of smoke carried something else, something chemical that made her nose burn just like the accelerant from her woodpile. Kaiser's reaction was immediate and stark. He stood rigid in the truck seat, nose twitching, a low whine building in his throat. This wasn't the normal distress dogs showed around fire. This was recognition. "You know something about this, don't you, boy?" Tamsin murmured, watching his focused reaction. The dog turned to meet her eyes, and in that moment she felt certain Kaiser wasn't just a cast-off farm dog. He knew something about these fires, something important. Before she could process this revelation, a heavy hand landed on her truck door, making her jump. Sheriff Rudd's round face appeared at her window, his badge catching the light from the flames. "Miss Holt," he said, his friendly tone at odds with his hard eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Just checking on the neighbors," Tamsin replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Kaiser had gone very still beside her, watching the sheriff with unblinking attention. "Speaking of checking in," Rudd continued, resting his forearms on her truck door, "I was meaning to stop by your place today. Been looking at some paperwork. Your brother left quite a few debts behind." Tamsin's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm aware of the situation, Sheriff." "Course you are. But you should know. Times being what they are, banks aren't as patient as they used to be. Shame to see another family farm go under." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Though I hear Commissioner Marrow might be interested in the property. Could be a solution there." The implication was clear as crystal. Sell to Marrow or lose everything anyway. Tamsin forced herself to meet Rudd's gaze. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I can handle my own affairs." "Sure hope so," Rudd said, straightening up. His eyes fell on Kaiser, and something flickered across his face. Recognition? Concern? "That's an interesting dog you've got there. Heard you picked him up at the Weiss auction." "That's right." Rudd's hand moved to rest on his gun belt. "Well, just make sure you keep him under control. Would hate to have any incidents." As the sheriff walked away, Tamsin's mind was racing. Why would Rudd care about her dog? And why did his warning sound so similar to Marrow's from the auction? Kaiser pressed against her side, his warmth steady and reassuring. The Andersons' barn continued to burn. And Tamsin couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected. The fire at her woodpile, the pressure from Rudd, Marrow's interest in her land, and this supposedly useless dog who acted more like a trained professional than a reject. She looked down at Kaiser, who was still tracking every movement of the emergency vehicles with expert attention. "What did you do before they called you useless?" she asked softly. And what do you know about these fires?" The dog's ears twitched at her questions, but his eyes remained fixed on the burning barn. In the distance, Tamsin could see Sheriff Rudd talking to a group of men, including Commissioner Marrow, who had apparently arrived on scene. They kept glancing in her direction. The smell of smoke grew stronger, carried on the wind, and Tamsin couldn't help but wonder if this was what her woodpile would have looked like if Kaiser hadn't alerted her. She felt cornered, hemmed in by debts and threats and things she didn't yet understand. But looking at her extraordinary dog, she had a growing suspicion that Kaiser might be more than just protection. He might be the key to understanding what was really happening in her small farming community. A sleek state vehicle pulled up to the smoldering remains of the Anderson barn, drawing Tamsin's attention away from Marrow and his group. The man who stepped out carried himself differently than the local officials, purposeful but unhurried, taking in the scene with careful consideration rather than the performative concern she'd witnessed from others. He was dressed simply in jeans and a dark button-down shirt, his badge clipped to his belt catching the morning light. As he approached the scene, Sheriff Rudd's entire demeanor shifted, his forced friendliness giving way to barely concealed irritation. "State Fire Marshal's office," the newcomer announced, showing his credentials. "Rowan Pike, I'm here to assess the scene." Sheriff Rudd's face reddened. "Now wait just a minute. This is a local matter. 3 suspicious fires in 2 months calls for state involvement," Pike interrupted calmly, already pulling on latex gloves. "Standard procedure, Sheriff." Kaiser suddenly strained at his leash, nearly pulling it from Tamsin's grip. His nose was working overtime, and he was staring intently at a particular section of the barn's remains. Without thinking, Tamsin let him lead her closer to the scene. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation site," Rudd called out sharply. "You need to step back." But Rowan Pike had noticed Kaiser's behavior. His gray-blue eyes narrowed with interest. "Hold on, Sheriff. Let's see what the dogs found." Kaiser moved with precise determination, following an invisible trail until he reached a specific spot near the barn's former entrance. There, he sat down firmly and looked back at the humans, letting out a single, sharp bark. Pike's eyebrows shot up. He approached the spot carefully, crouching down to examine the area Kaiser had indicated. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, pulling an evidence bag from his kit. "This is exactly where I'd expect to find traces of accelerant." Tamsin felt her chest tighten. "He's been acting strange around anything fire-related since I got him." "When was that?" Pike asked, carefully scraping samples into his evidence bag. 3 days ago, at the Weiss estate auction. They said he was useless, sold him for $1. Pike froze momentarily, then continued his work with deliberate care. "Mind if I take a look at his papers?" Tamsin retrieved the sparse documentation from her truck. Pike reviewed it, his frown deepening. "These records don't add up. They list him as untrained, no special skills. But what I just saw," he gestured toward Kaiser, "that's specialized accelerant detection behavior. These dogs go through extensive training. They're valuable tools in arson investigation." "There's something else," Tamsin said, lowering her voice. "Someone tried to set fire to my woodpile the night I brought him home. Kaiser woke me up in time to stop it." Pike's expression grew serious. He glanced over at where Marrow and Rudd were watching them, then guided Tamsin a few steps further from the scene. "Miss Holt, are you aware that every property that's burned in the last 2 months had recently refused a purchase offer from Commissioner Marrow?" A chill ran down Tamsin's spine, despite the morning heat. "He's been sending letters, offering to help with my brother's debts. Let me guess, for about 40 cents on the dollar of what the land's worth?" Tamsin nodded. "And you turned him down?" "Yesterday morning. Sent back his latest offer marked not for sale in red ink." The words felt different now, heavy with consequence. Pike straightened up, his face grim. "Miss Holt, I'm going to be direct. These fires follow a pattern. First comes the offer. Then pressure from local officials about debts or code violations. Then, if the owner still won't sell..." He gestured to the ruins of the Anderson barn. Kaiser pressed against Tamsin's leg, his solid warmth grounding her as the implications sank in. "You're saying because I wouldn't sell..." "You may have made yourself a target," Pike confirmed. "But your dog here, he might be more important than anyone realized. The way he zeroed in on that accelerant." He paused, studying Kaiser with renewed interest. There's more to his story than those shelter records show. Commissioner Marrow chose that moment to approach, his expensive shoes incongruous among the ashes. "Marshal Pike," he said smoothly, "surely you're not wasting time on conspiracy theories. These old barns are fire hazards. Faulty wiring, hay spontaneous combustion, perfectly natural explanations." "Natural explanations don't usually involve accelerants, Commissioner," Pike replied evenly. "Accelerants?" Marrow's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Come now, Marshal. You can't possibly base that assumption on the behavior of an untrained mutt." Kaiser's growl was barely audible, but his eyes never left Marrow's face. "I'll base my findings on the laboratory analysis," Pike said, "along with a thorough investigation of all recent fires in the county." Marrow's smile tightened further. "Well, don't let me keep you from your investigation." He turned to Tamsin, his voice dropping to something closer to a threat than concern. "Miss Holt, do reconsider my offer. Would hate to see anything happen to that lovely old farm of yours." As Marrow walked away, Pike handed Tamsin his card. "My direct number's on there. Any concerns, day or night, you call. And Miss Holt?" He glanced meaningfully at Kaiser. "Keep that dog close. Something tells me he's a lot more than just a $1 companion." Tamsin watched Pike return to his evidence collection, her mind racing. She'd bought Kaiser thinking she was saving him, but now she wondered if he'd been sent to save her instead. The dog sat alertly at her side, his posture professional and focused. Nothing like the useless animal she'd been told about at the auction. Who had Kaiser belonged to before? What did he know about these fires? And most importantly, what would someone do to keep those secrets buried? Back at her farm that evening, Tamsin couldn't shake Pike's words about Kaiser's specialized behavior. She sat at her kitchen table, watching the German Shepherd methodically patrol the room's perimeter, his movements precise and purposeful. Nothing about him seemed random or untrained. "What aren't you telling me, boy?" she murmured. Kaiser's ears perked up at her voice, and he padded over to sit beside her chair. The simple action triggered a memory. At the auction, someone had muttered something that made the dog respond. What was it? Something German. "Sits?" she tried hesitantly. Kaiser immediately dropped into a perfect sitting position, his posture military straight. Tamsin's eyes widened. "Well, would you look at that?" She racked her brain for other German commands she'd heard in movies. Platz?" The dog smoothly transitioned into a down position, alert and waiting for the next command. "Stay?" Kaiser rose to stand, maintaining perfect form. "Here?" He came to her side, positioning himself exactly at her left hip. Tamsin's heart raced. This wasn't just basic obedience. This was professional training, the kind that took months or years to perfect. She reached down to examine his worn collar more closely, turning it in the fading evening light. There, almost completely scratched away, she could make out a series of numbers. She grabbed her laptop, fingers trembling slightly as she typed the numbers into a search engine. Several clicks later, she found herself staring at a state database of certified working dogs. The registration number matched, but what she read next made her breath catch. Handler, Greta Weiss, State Fire Marshal's Office, Accelerant Detection K9 Unit. Tamsin clicked through to Greta's profile, scanning quickly. Awards for arson investigation. Numerous successful prosecutions. And then, 8 months ago. Deceased, accidental death. Further searching revealed newspaper articles about Greta's work. In one photo, she stood proudly beside Kaiser, both of them wearing official fire investigation vests. The article praised their record-breaking number of accelerant detections and successful arson prosecutions. "So that's who you really are," Tamsin whispered, looking at Kaiser with new understanding. He met her gaze steadily, as if relieved to be recognized at last. She dug deeper, finding more recent articles. Greta's death had been ruled an accident, a home gas leak. But the timing nagged at Tamsin. The article mentioned Greta had been preparing to testify in a major case, though details were sparse. 8 months ago, Tamsin muttered, counting backward, right when the local fires started picking up. Kaiser's ears pricked forward at the word fires. Tamsin turned to face him fully. "You were never useless, were you? You were evidence. Evidence someone needed to disappear." She thought about how Kaiser had ended up at that auction, about his immediate reaction to Merrow, about Pike's comments regarding the pattern of fires following rejected purchase offers. Greta must have found something, she reasoned aloud. Something about these fires. Something that got her killed. And you... She looked at Kaiser with growing amazement. "You were there. You know what she found." Kaiser's intense gaze seemed to confirm her theory. He moved to the kitchen door, looking back at her expectantly. "You want to show me something?" He led her to the kerosene shed he'd been so interested in earlier. Inside, he went straight to a corner where old rags were piled, sniffing intently. Tamsin grabbed a flashlight and examined the rags more closely. There were faint stains, and when she cautiously sniffed, she detected an odd chemical smell underneath the kerosene. "This is what you've been trying to tell me," she breathed. "This is what Greta trained you to find. Some kind of special accelerant?" Kaiser's tail wagged once, definitively. Tamsin sat back on her heels, mind racing. So Greta figured out someone was using a specific accelerant blend, something traceable. She trained you to detect it, collected evidence. She looked at Kaiser. And when she died, they made sure you disappeared too. Except she'd bought him for $1, accidentally throwing a wrench in someone's careful plans. No wonder there had been an attempt on her woodpile that very night. They couldn't risk Kaiser being found by someone who might recognize what he was. "We need to tell Pike," she decided. "He needs to know about Greta, about your training, about all of it." Kaiser's ears suddenly swiveled toward the window. A moment later, Tamsin heard the crunch of tires on her gravel driveway. She peered out the shed door. Familiar truck was pulling up. Sheriff Rudd's. Her stomach tightened as she remembered Pike's warning about pressure from local officials. Kaiser pressed against her leg, a low growl building in his chest. In the growing darkness, his stance was protective, professional, every inch the trained K9 officer he truly was. "Okay, boy," she whispered. "Let's keep your secret a little longer, but tomorrow we're going to start fighting back, for Greta, for justice." She squared her shoulders, drawing strength from Kaiser's solid presence beside her. For the truth. Together they walked out to meet whatever was coming, united in purpose for the first time since that fateful auction. Kaiser was no longer just a $1 dog. He was the key to unraveling a deadly conspiracy. And Tamsin was no longer just a struggling farmer. She was the partner he'd chosen to help finish Greta's work. The truth about Kaiser's identity was just the beginning. Now they had to prove it before anyone else got hurt. or worse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the burned-out shell of the Thompson barn. Tamsin stood with Rowan Pike and Kaiser at the edge of the scorched earth, watching as the German shepherd's demeanor shifted from casual to laser-focused. "Ready?" Rowan asked, checking his notebook. "Remember the command Greta used?" Tamsin nodded, her throat tight with anticipation. "Suchin!" she called out clearly. Kaiser's ears pricked forward, his entire body tensing. "Search," Tamsin translated, though Rowan already knew. They'd spent the early morning reviewing Kaiser's training records, which Pike had pulled from state archives. Kaiser moved with precision, nose working methodically over the ground. His pattern was deliberate, tight circles expanding outward from the barn's foundation. Suddenly, he stopped, sat sharply, and looked back at them. "There," Rowan said quietly, marking the spot on his grid paper. "That's a trained alert. He's found something." They approached carefully. Rowan knelt, using tweezers to collect trace samples from the soil. "The rain should have washed away any obvious accelerants," he explained. "But Kaiser's picking up vapor trails that machines can't detect. Dogs can smell in parts per trillion." They worked their way through 3 more fire sites that morning. At each one, Kaiser alerted multiple times, leading them to specific points where the fires had originated. Rowan documented everything meticulously, his face growing grimmer with each discovery. "Look at this pattern," he said finally, spreading his notes on the hood of his truck. "The ignition points form almost perfect triangles at each site. That's not random. Someone's using a deliberate setup to ensure maximum damage." Tamsin studied the diagrams, her stomach churning. "And these melted pieces you found?" "Timer devices," Rowan confirmed. "Professional grade, the kind you can't just pick up at the hardware store." He glanced at her. "This is organized. Arson. Tamsin. Someone's investing serious money in making these fires look accidental." Kaiser sat alertly between them, his presence a reminder of Greta's suspicious death. Tamsin couldn't shake the feeling that they were tugging on threads that led somewhere dangerous. On the drive back to her farm, Tamsin noticed an unmarked white truck parked on one of the back roads. The driver seemed to be studying a map, but something about it felt wrong. She mentioned it to Rowan. "Get the plate number?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Couldn't see one," she admitted. "It was covered in dust." Rowan's jaw tightened. "I'll make some calls, see if anyone else has noticed suspicious vehicles." But that wasn't the end of it. The next morning, Tamsin found unfamiliar boot prints near her gate, heavy treads that didn't match any of her usual visitors. Kaiser growled low in his throat when he sniffed them. She photographed the prints before they faded, noting how they circled the property's perimeter. Watching. Assessing. Rowan came by more frequently after that, often staying late into the evening. She caught him checking the locks, noting blind spots around the buildings. His protective instincts were obvious, but Tamsin refused to be intimidated. "I'm not hiding," she told him firmly one evening. "This land was Jake's whole life. He poured everything into it." She gestured at the rolling pastures, the weathered barn, the horses grazing in the distance. "My brother died thinking he'd failed to save it. I won't let his legacy disappear into some developer's pocket." Rowan studied her for a long moment. "Then we do this smart," he said finally. "We build the case quietly. Document everything. Kaiser's evidence is important, but we need more." They spent the next few days compiling their findings. Rowan cross-referenced property records with fire dates. Tamsin mapped out which farmers had received purchase offers from Merrow's development company. Kaiser's alerts at each site were carefully documented, along with soil samples and photographs of the timer devices. A pattern emerged, clear as day. Every property that had burned had first received an offer from Merrow. When the owners refused to sell, Fires followed within months. The damaged land was then bought for pennies on the dollar through shell companies that all traced back to Marrow's associates. "This is it," Rowan said, reviewing their report. "The first real evidence linking these fires to an organized operation." He looked up at Tamsin. "Are you sure you want to be part of this? Once we submit this report, there's no going back." Tamsin scratched Kaiser's ears, remembering the dollar that had bought him at auction. $1 that had unknowingly purchased the key to unraveling years of corruption. "Greta died trying to expose this," she said quietly. "Kaiser survived to finish what she started. I'm seeing it through." Kaiser pressed against her leg, his presence steady and reassuring. Together, they watched the sun set over the pastures, painting the sky in fierce oranges and reds. Somewhere in the growing darkness, another unmarked truck rolled past on the back road. Waiting. Watching. But Tamsin stood her ground, Kaiser alert beside her. This land had seen enough fire and fear. It was time for truth to burn brighter than any arsonist's flame. Rowan carefully packed away their evidence, his movements deliberate. "I'll file this first thing tomorrow," he said. "Keep Kaiser close tonight." Tamsin nodded, knowing the stakes were rising with every piece of evidence they gathered. The boot prints at her gate weren't just a warning. They were a promise of battles to come. But as she watched Rowan's taillights disappear down her long driveway, Tamsin felt stronger than afraid. She had Kaiser's loyalty, Rowan's support, and most importantly, the truth slowly emerging from years of calculated lies. Her brother's legacy wouldn't end in ashes. Instead, it would become the foundation for exposing the corruption that had claimed too many farms, too many dreams, and at least one dedicated investigator's life. Kaiser's low whine drew her attention to movement in the tree line. Another shadow, another watcher. But Tamsin didn't retreat inside. She stood her ground, her hand resting on Kaiser's solid shoulder, ready to face whatever came next. The night air hung thick and heavy as Tamsin and Rowan drove back from checking another burn site. Kaiser sat alert in the back seat, his ears pricking at every shadow that crossed their headlights. They'd spent hours documenting Kaiser's alerts, gathering soil samples and photographing what remained of the scorched barn. "We should have enough evidence now," Rowan said, checking the rearview mirror for the third time in as many minutes. "Those timer devices Kaiser found are exactly like the ones from the other sites." Tamsin nodded, clutching the folder of photographs in her lap. "I just hope it's enough to—" She stopped mid-sentence, squinting through the windshield. "That truck behind us. It's been following since we left the Thompson place." Rowan's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I see it, trying to stay just at the edge of our lights." The dark pickup lurked behind them like a predator, matching their every turn along the winding country road. Kaiser's low growl filled the cab. Through the mirror, Tamsin caught glimpses of a familiar, broad-shouldered figure behind the wheel. Silas Kett, Marrow's muscle. "He's getting closer," Tamsin warned, her heart hammering against her ribs. Without warning, the truck surged forward, ramming their back bumper. The impact threw them forward against their seatbelts. Kaiser braced himself, legs splayed wide. "Hold on!" Rowan fought to keep control as Silas struck again, harder this time. The truck fishtailed, tires screaming against asphalt. The third hit came from the side, metal shrieking as Silas tried to force them off the road. Tamsin grabbed the dashboard as they spun, the world becoming a blur of shadows and scattered moonlight. She heard Kaiser's sharp bark, felt the sickening lurch as their truck tilted. They hit the ditch hard. The impact sent them rolling, glass shattering as the passenger window exploded inward. Tamsin covered her face, feeling the sting of cuts on her arms. The truck groaned to a stop on its side, engine sputtering into silence. "Tamsin!" Rowan's voice was tight with pain. "You okay?" "I think so," she managed, tasting blood from where she'd bit her lip. "Kaiser?" A flash of movement caught her eye. Through the broken window, she saw Kaiser launching himself out of the truck like a missile. The German Shepherd had somehow stayed unharmed, and now he moved with deadly purpose. Silas had stopped his truck and was approaching, something metallic glinting in his hand. He never saw Kaiser coming. The dog hit him full force, 100 pounds of trained muscle and protective fury. They went down in a tangle of limbs and startled shouts. "Kaiser, halt!" Tamsin called out in German, struggling with her seatbelt. The dog immediately pinned Silas down, teeth bared inches from his throat. Rowan kicked out his door and climbed free, helping Tamsin out after him. They were both battered and bleeding, but alive. Silas lay motionless under Kaiser's weight, his face pale with fear. "Don't let that beast kill me," he pleaded, dropping whatever he'd been holding. A tire iron clattered against the pavement. "He won't," Tamsin said, her voice steel-cold. "Not unless you move." Rowan pulled out his phone, calling for backup. While they waited, Tamsin noticed something odd about Silas's truck. The bed was covered with a tarp, but one corner had come loose, revealing what looked like a hidden compartment built into the side. "What's in there?" she demanded. Silas just glared, but Kaiser's warning growl loosened his tongue. "Just some tools. Nothing important." Rowan investigated while Tamsin kept Kaiser steady. He pulled back the tarp, revealing a sophisticated hide built into the truck bed. Inside, they found dozens of electronic timing devices, identical to the ones they'd been documenting at the burn sites. "Well, well," Rowan said grimly, photographing everything. "Looks like we found your delivery system. These match the igniters from every fire we've investigated." Silas's face went from pale to ashen. "Marrow's gonna kill me." "Marrow won't get the chance," Rowan assured him, securing the evidence. "You're going to tell us everything about his operation. Every fire, every payoff, every threat." Red and blue lights appeared on the horizon as sheriff's deputies responded to Rowan's call. Tamsin knelt beside Kaiser, hugging him close. Blood from her cuts matted his fur, but she didn't care. His courage had saved their lives and broken open a case that had festered for years. "Good boy," she whispered, feeling him tremble with leftover adrenaline. "Such a good, brave boy." As the deputies took Silas into custody, Tamsin watched Rowan explaining about the hidden compartment and its damning contents. What had started as a simple investigation had exploded into something far more dangerous. Marrow's network of arson and intimidation was larger than any of them had suspected, and now they'd made themselves targets. Kaiser pressed against her leg, still alert, still watching the shadows. He'd proven himself far more than the useless dog from the auction. He was a hero, a protector, and living proof that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the most unexpected places. Paramedics insisted on checking their injuries. Tamsin had cuts from the broken glass and some nasty bruises from the seatbelt. Rowan's shoulder was wrenched, and a gash above his eye needed stitches. But they were alive, and they had evidence that would be impossible to ignore. Silas's truck, with its hidden cargo of timing devices, would connect Marrow directly to the string of suspicious fires. The enforcer's eventual testimony would fill in the gaps. Years of corruption and violence were about to come crashing down, all because of a $1 dog who refused to let evil go unchallenged. The state fire marshal's office was quiet this late in the evening. Rowan spread dozens of files across his desk, while Tamsin sat beside him, Kaiser alert at her feet. Her arms still bore bandages from the crash 3 days ago, but determination had pushed the pain aside. "Greta Weiss was meticulous," Rowan said, carefully opening another folder. Everything she did was documented, cross-referenced, backed up, which makes these gaps in her files even more suspicious. Tamsin leaned forward, studying a photograph of a younger Kaiser beside a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and perfect posture. That's her? Yes, one of the best accelerant detection specialists in the state. She trained Kaiser herself, started him as a pup. Rowan's voice held quiet respect. When she died, a lot of her work disappeared. Convenient for some people. Kaiser's ears pricked at a sound in the hallway, but it was just the cleaning crew. Tamsin scratched behind his ears, feeling the raised scar tissue hidden beneath his fur. How many stories did this brave dog carry? Here, Rowan said suddenly, pulling out a thick manila envelope. This was sealed in evidence after her death. Nobody's touched it since. Together they spread the contents across the desk. Photographs of burn patterns, chemical analysis reports, property records showing a web of shell companies all leading back to one name, Clint Merrow. She was building a case against him, Tamsin breathed. All these fires, these accidents. She proved they were connected. Rowan nodded grimly. Look at the dates. The patterns match exactly what we're seeing now. Same accelerant blend, same timing devices, same target properties. He shuffled through more papers. She even identified his source for the chemicals, a specialty, supplier that only works with licensed investigators. Like her, Tamsin realized. He was stealing her own materials to cover his tracks. Smart woman, Greta. She figured it out by analyzing residue from multiple sites. That's why Kaiser's training was so specific. She taught him to detect this exact combination of accelerants. Tamsin's hand found Kaiser's head, remembering how he'd reacted to the kerosene shed that first day. He knew. All this time he was trying to tell us. Dogs don't forget their training, Rowan said softly. Especially not ones as smart as him. Greta made sure he could identify Merrow's signature blend perfectly. He was her ace in the hole. Living proof that someone was using stolen investigator supplies for arson. A notation caught Tamsin's eye. She pulled out a report dated just weeks before Greta's death. Look at this. She was planning to bring Kaiser to testify before a grand jury. His alerts would have proven the same accelerants were used across multiple sites. Which is why she had to go. Rowan's jaw tightened, and why Kaiser had to disappear. More pieces fell into place as they dug deeper. Greta's accident, a car crash on a clear day, brake lines mysteriously failed. Kaiser disappeared into the system. Then Merrow himself acquired the dog through county channels, staging that mockery of an auction. He needed Kaiser gone, but killing a trained police dog would raise too many questions, Tamsin said. So he made sure Kaiser ended up looking worthless, unwanted, just another failed K9 unit being sold off cheap. Never expecting someone would take him home for $1. Rowan's eyes held quiet admiration. Or that he'd end up protecting the very land Merrow was trying to steal. Kaiser's head lifted suddenly, nose working the air. He padded to a filing cabinet and sat, staring intently at the bottom drawer. Tamsin recognized that pose. It was the same alert behavior he showed at fire scenes. Rowan opened the drawer carefully. Inside was a sealed evidence bag containing cloth samples from old cases. The distinctive chemical smell was faint but present. Even here, he's still working, Tamsin said proudly. Still trying to finish Greta's mission. And now we can help him do that. Rowan gathered the most crucial files, tucking them safely away. We have Silas in custody. We have Kaiser's training records proving his credentials. And most importantly, we have Greta's original case files connecting everything back to Merrow. Tamsin felt a fierce surge of purpose. This wasn't just about saving her farm anymore. This was about justice. For Greta, for Kaiser, for every family who'd lost their land to Marrow's schemes. "We need to move carefully," Rowan cautioned. "Marrow's already proven he's willing to kill to keep this quiet. We'll need witness protection for Silas, court orders to access more records." "And protection for Kaiser," Tamsin added firmly. "He's not just a dog anymore. He's evidence." "The most important kind," Rowan agreed. "Living proof that ties everything together. Greta's final witness, ready to testify in his own way." They worked late into the night, organizing files, making copies, building the case Greta had died trying to complete. Kaiser stayed close, as if he understood the importance of their task. His presence felt like a bridge between past and present, Greta's legacy helping them finish what she'd started. When they finally left the office, the night air was cool and clean. Kaiser walked between them, alert but relaxed. Tamsin looked up at the stars, feeling the weight of everything they'd uncovered. "Thank you," she said quietly to Rowan, "for believing in us, for helping us find the truth." He smiled, the expression gentle in the darkness. "Thank you for being brave enough to look for it, and for giving $1 for a dog everyone else had written off." Kaiser's tail wagged once, as if agreeing. He'd gone from being useless to becoming the key that would unlock justice. His loyalty to Greta's training, his protective instincts toward Tamsin, his courage in the face of danger, it all painted a picture of a dog who never forgot his true purpose. Together, they would honor Greta's memory and expose Marrow's crimes. The path ahead would be dangerous, but they had truth on their side. And they had Kaiser, not a broken dog at all, but a highly trained professional ready to finish the mission he'd started with Greta. The evidence was clear. The connections were solid. Now it was time to bring everything into the light and let justice take its course. Tamsin slumped her shoulders as she walked into Miller's general store, making sure her body language spelled defeat. She grabbed a few basic supplies, waiting until old Mrs. Miller approached with concern in her eyes. "Honey, I heard about the pressure you're under," the elderly woman said softly. No shame in knowing when to fold. Tamsin forced her voice to waver. "Times are hard. Maybe it's time to be practical." She let her eyes water slightly, knowing word would spread fast in their small town. By sunset, 3 different people had called to check on her. Each conversation felt like playing a part in a carefully scripted play. She hated the deception, but knew it was necessary. Back at the farm, Rowan helped her position the last hidden camera. "That's number 12, he said, adjusting the weatherproof housing. "Full coverage of every approach to the barn." Kaiser prowled the perimeter, his nose working overtime. Suddenly, he stopped near the north corner, pawing at the ground and giving his trained alert signal. "Here," Tamsin called. "He's found something." They carefully excavated the spot, revealing a newly buried fuel line snaking toward her barn's foundation. The black pipe was professional grade, clearly meant to feed an intense fire. "They're getting bolder," Rowan said, documenting everything with his camera. This setup would have made it look like an electrical fire spread to stored fuel. "Can we remove it?" Tamsin asked. "We'll disable part of it," Rowan replied. "Leave enough to prove intent when they come to finish the job." He worked methodically, explaining each step. "See how they've spliced it here? That's the same technique we found at 3 other sites." Kaiser kept watch as they worked, his ears constantly moving to track distant sounds. Tamsin had learned to trust his instincts completely. The once useless dog had become their most reliable early warning system. Rowan's team arrived after dark, parking their unmarked vehicles in the back 40 where they wouldn't be spotted from the road. 4 experienced investigators, all hand-picked for their discretion and skill. They set up their surveillance equipment with quiet efficiency. "Comms check," the senior tech whispered. handing Tamsin and Rowan their earpieces. "Channel 3 is primary, Channel 5 for emergency backup." Tamsin adjusted the nearly invisible device. "Testing. Testing." Her whisper came through clearly on everyone's receivers. They ran through the response plan twice. Tamsin would stay in the house, making it look occupied but dark. Rowan's team would maintain a loose perimeter, ready to move in. Kaiser would stay with Tamsin, his presence hidden until needed. "Remember," Rowan said firmly, "no one moves until we have clear evidence of criminal intent. We need to catch them in the act." The waiting was the hardest part. Tamsin kept to her normal routine during the day, but nights were tense with anticipation. Kaiser stayed close, sensing her anxiety. His solid presence helped steady her nerves. On the third night, Kaiser's ears pricked up an hour after sunset. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Movement at the south gate," crackled a voice in Tamsin's earpiece. "2 vehicles, lights off." She dimmed her kitchen lights as planned, making it appear she was heading to bed. Kaiser took his position by the back door, perfectly still, but fully alert. Through her window, Tamsin could barely make out dark figures moving toward the barn. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady as she tracked them through her night vision monocular. "4 subjects," came another whisper through comms. "Carrying equipment cases, moving along the tree line." "Hold positions," Rowan's calm voice responded. "Let them reach the target zone." Tamsin watched the shadowy figures approach the barn. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearly professionals who had done this before. It made her blood boil to think how many other farms they had destroyed. Kaiser's muscles tensed beside her. He could smell them, she knew. One soft command in German would send him charging out there, but that wasn't the plan. Tonight, he was their secret weapon, held in reserve. "They're accessing the fuel line," reported a team member. "Subject 1 is connecting additional equipment." "Document everything," Rowan instructed. "Remember, we need clear evidence of intent." Minutes crawled by. Tamsin's fingers tightened on Kaiser's collar as she watched the arsonists work. They were so close to ending this, to bringing down Marrow's whole operation. Justice for Greta, for all the families who had lost their land, was within reach. The surveillance team captured everything: the professional equipment, the skilled installation, the careful placement of timers. No random vandals these. Every movement proved this was a well-planned, deliberate operation. "All units ready," Rowan whispered. "On my mark." Tamsin held her breath. Kaiser remained perfectly still beside her, years of training evident in his disciplined patience. Through her window, she could see the arsonists making their final preparations. Victory felt tantalizingly close. The trap was set. The evidence was mounting. Now they just had to spring it at exactly the right moment. Through her earpiece, she heard Rowan's team confirming their positions one last time. They had the barn surrounded. Hidden cameras were recording everything. The fuel line had been secretly disabled, preventing any actual danger to her property. For the first time since this began, Tamsin felt truly ahead of the game. They weren't just reacting anymore. They were in control. With Kaiser's skills, Rowan's experience, and her own determination, they had turned the tables on Marrow's organization. The arsonists continued their work, unaware they were being documented from every angle. Their movements were unhurried, confident. They had no idea that their routine operation was about to become their downfall. Kaiser's ears twitched at each tiny sound, but he maintained his position. Like everyone else, he was waiting for the signal. The former useless dog had become an essential part of their carefully coordinated team. Tamsin watched through her night vision as the pieces fell into place. Everything they had worked for was coming together. Justice was finally within reach. The crunch of gravel shattered their carefully laid plans. Silas Kett emerged from the shadows far earlier than expected, moving with deadly purpose. Before Tamsin or Rowan could react, he had herded them into the barn at gunpoint. "Should have sold when you had the chance," Silas growled, slamming the heavy door. The sound of chains rattling and a padlock clicking shut echoed through the wooden structure. Rowan grabbed his radio, but only static answered. "Signal's blocked," he muttered. The sharp smell of accelerant filled the air. Through gaps in the wood slats, they watched helplessly as Silas methodically spread the fuel. The strike of a match flared in the darkness. Smoke began seeping under the door. The fire spread with terrifying speed, feeding on the decades-old timber. Support beams groaned overhead as flames licked higher. Kaiser, who had been hidden outside, began barking frantically. Tamsin could barely see through the thickening smoke, but she heard him scratching and whining at the far wall. "He's found something," she choked out, stumbling toward the sound. Rowan followed, staying low where the air was clearer. They found Kaiser pawing at a rusted ventilation grate. Together, they wrenched it free just as the first beam crashed behind them. Heat seared their skin as they squeezed through the narrow opening, Kaiser pulling them forward by their sleeves. But instead of running to safety, Kaiser wheeled around and darted back into the inferno. Tamsin screamed his name, but seconds later he emerged, dragging Silas's forgotten satchel. Inside lay a ledger and phone filled with damning evidence, names, dates, payments for each orchestrated fire. They stumbled away from the collapsing structure, watching as flames devoured her barn. The heat was intense enough to singe their hair from 30 feet away. Tamsin clutched Kaiser's fur with trembling hands, knowing how close they'd come to joining the ashes. The sound of approaching sirens pierced the night. But Tamsin could only stare at the inferno, understanding with crystal clarity the price of standing against men like Merrow. Yet in her hands, she held the proof that would finally bring them down. The morning mist clung to the old wooden bridge like a protective shroud. Tamsin stood alone, her shoulders squared against the dawn, her boots scuffed against weathered planks as she waited, knowing what was coming. 2 vehicles approached, Merrow's gleaming black SUV and Silas's mud-splattered truck. Kaiser lay hidden in the brush nearby, waiting for her command. "Ready to be reasonable?" Merrow called out, his expensive shoes clicking on the bridge boards. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to make a deal," Tamsin replied steadily. "Just like you wanted." Silas circled behind her, exactly as she'd anticipated. The moment he lunged, Tamsin barked out, "Fass!" Kaiser exploded from cover, taking Silas down with practiced precision. The enforcer hit the planks hard, Kaiser's training holding him firmly in place. "What is this?" Merrow sputtered, backing away. But Rowan Pike stepped out from behind a support beam, warrant in hand. More vehicles appeared, blocking both ends of the bridge. State police emerged with weapons drawn. Merrow turned to run, pushing past the officers. His foot slipped on the wet wood, sending him lurching toward the rushing water below. Without hesitation, Tamsin grabbed his jacket, hauling him back from the edge. "You don't get to escape that easily," she said firmly. "You face what you've done." In the weeks that followed, justice moved swiftly. Merrow and Silas were convicted on multiple counts of arson and fraud. Sheriff Rudd resigned in disgrace when his involvement came to light. At the farm, Tamsin signed Kaiser's official adoption papers with a smile. Together with Rowan, they began search and rescue training, giving Kaiser a new purpose that honored both his skills and Greta's memory. The farm flourished under autumn sunshine, its fields stretching toward distant mountains. Kaiser patrolled his territory with proud confidence, while Tamsin watched from the porch, finally at peace. They had both found redemption in each other, turning a $1 dog and a struggling farmer into something extraordinary. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.